Hello, my friends. Welcome to Origins. My name's Donn Chapman. It's my privilege to be your host. You know, Origins is a forum that uses the evidence of science to validate the truth of creation. Our guest today is Dr. David Menton. Dr. Menton, good to have you with us. Just so everybody knows, for many years you were a professor of anatomy at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, Missouri. But then you got promoted. You now work for Answers in Genesis, live in Kentucky. Is that right?
That's right.
And today we're doing part 2 on bones and the bones in our body. You've called it God's girders, and we looked at the growth of bones last time. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to talk about, I guess, how you would take a small bone, like in a baby. Imagine a little leg bone in a baby that in the womb would be no more than that, maybe when you're born like this.
Right.
How do you turn that femur from this big into this big?
Yeah, you think, you know, we're probably right around 20 inches when we're born, and we're going to grow to 6 feet, just in general terms. There's got to be some change in bones for that to happen.
That's right, and if you think about it, you just can't wait until you're full size. The bones have to function all the time that they're growing.
It can't be a part-time job, that's
right.
for sure. How many bones do we have in our body, Dr. Menton?
Well, you know, that's a more difficult question than it might seem. Generally, you'll read in the encyclopedias and what have you that we have about 206 bones in our body. Suffice it to say, we have something in excess of 200 bones in the adult. The interesting thing is that a baby has many more bones than an adult.
Now, why is that? It's so much smaller. Why would it need more bones?
Well, let's take the hip bone.
Okay.
In our body, we have a right hip bone and a left hip bone, and they're kind of held together by the sacrum in the back there. When we're developing, before the age 20, let's say, we reach about 20, 21 years old before all our bones are finally fused together. But before we reach that age, starting from the time we're born, there are bones that are separate pieces. The hip bones are 3 bones, each of the hip bones. The ilium, the pubic bone, and the ischium. And they meet right in that ball socket joint where the hip goes in. And then as the baby grows older, a child approaches an adult, finally these bones all fuse together to make one bone.
So the 3 become 1.
That's right. And in the skull, of course, there are many separate bones in the vault of the skull. You can feel a little soft spot on the baby's head. And
we don't have that anymore.
Right,
yeah.
No, at our age, and we won't divulge that, at our age these bones have, suffice it to say, long since fused, yes, so that our skull would be very difficult to grow larger at this point.
Now, all of this is happening. Does every bone in our body change size and grow?
Well, it's interesting. All the bones in our body have to get bigger as we get bigger, say from the time of birth till, say, age 20 or so, whenever we reach full size. But there are 3 bones in the body, actually 6, one on each side,
okay,
that do not grow. And these are bones I'm sure everybody's heard about. We see them here compared to a penny. These are tiny. They are not only the tiniest bones in the body, but they're the only bones that don't grow. These are the ear bones.
And they're the exact same size they were the day we were born.
That's right. They just, when you look at them in a row up here, we have 3 bones. We have one here that's called the hammer, because it's sort of shaped like a hammer. We have the anvil, because it's sort of shaped like an anvil. And we have the stirrup that's shaped exactly like a stirrup on a saddle. Those 3 are hinged together by little lubricated joints. And the hammer is attached to the eardrum, so when it wiggles, it sends the sound through the bones to the foot plate on the stirrup. But those 3 are tiny, and they don't change in shape. Everything else has to grow in shape, and that's and size, and that's a fascinating story in its own right. Let's consider this bone. We're looking at just the end, and it's starting out being this size here. Kind of goes up here like this, okay?
That helps, yeah.
And it's going to grow to be this size,
okay,
the next one. For bone to grow, 2 things have to happen simultaneously. We have to have cells that can make bone, that can lay the bone matrix down. We have to have other cells that can remove it. It's sort of if we had maybe a statue, think of a plaster statue, and we want to make this statue that's now 3 feet tall, 6 feet tall. To do this, we could say, well, we'll take some plaster on a trowel here, and we'll add some plaster. But then we also have to have a chisel to kind of cut things away. And this will dynamically cause the bone to become larger and change perhaps somewhat in shape. And we call that process modeling. The bone models as it gets bigger or changes shape. And we have two very specialized cells that accomplish that for us, that growth. So we must remove bone and we must add bone. And the two cells that do the work for us, the ones that make the bone, are called the osteoblasts. Osteo means bone and blast means forming or making. And the cells that carve the bone away are called osteoclasts. Once again, osteo means bone, but clast means eater or eating. So we have bone formers and bone eaters.
Okay.
Now we just happen to have both of these cells visible in this picture. The cells that you see along here, possibly I should use a little different color so it shows up better. The cells here, all along this surface, this is bone, the red material here. These cells here are more over here and here. These are osteoblasts. They're going to secrete matrix that at first will be soft, but mineral will come in ultimately from the bloodstream and form with it, and that will make it hard. In the process, some cells will be left behind. Here's a cell right here that's being kind of buried in bone. Here's one that's buried way down here. These cells were originally on the surface, but as they make bone matrix, some of them get left behind. We call those osteocytes, that just mean bone cells. But there's a second cell in here, and here it is right here. We'll make a big arrow because this is a big cell. This is the osteoclast. The osteoclast has several nuclei inside, which allows it to become a very large cell. Look how big this cell is compared to
It's 4 or 5 times as big as the osteoblast.
these others.
Yeah, that's right.
And the osteoclast, if you'll notice, is digging a trench in the bone. The osteoclast can eat bone so fast that it's possible, if you're actually looking at it in a microscope in living tissue, it's possible to, in the course of time, actually see it. It's like a drill bit going right into the bone. Coming along behind it can be another cell that'll make bone. So it's possible to take a piece of bone away and then turn right around and add it back.
You know, it's amazing, first of all, that God put these in our body because He knew we had to grow and change. I guess the question that begs to be asked is, how do those cells know when to dig and where to build?
Well, the way that happens, we're just beginning to understand, and it really is remarkable. Let's just look at an interesting phenomenon that was discovered some years ago called the piezoelectric effect. Now, piezoelectric is simply a phenomenon that involves having crystals that are together in a tissue. Crystals of a little different nature, and when the crystals are bent, they generate small electric currents in the microamp range. And if you consider this little orange stick here to be a piece of bone, and it doesn't have to be alive, it can be dead. There are crystals in this bone which are arranged in such a way that if we push on the end, imagine this is like a diving board now.
Okay.
And the arrow is going to jump on the diving board. So let's get it hopping here.
Oh, you got to move.
Yeah,
That's
when
great.
it jumps on the board,
Wow.
Notice it generates electric currents, a negative charge on one side and a positive charge on the other.
Unbelievable.
Now, as I say, this can be done with a piece of dead bone. It doesn't have to be alive. And it's believed that it is these electric currents that have an effect on the osteoblast, the bone maker, the osteoclast, the bone carver or eater. And so if a force is trying to bend this bone and push it down like somebody heavy standing on the diving board, we have the ability, due to electric currents, to recruit osteoblasts to come up and build in the bottom of the board to give a little bit more strength, and osteoclasts can maybe carve away some of the top of the board to retain its strength to best accommodate this force. See, the bones in our bodies are changing all the time. If we were to push on our forehead for about 6 months or a year, we'd have a dent on our forehead because that force would cause the bones to change shape. Again, due to osteoclast carving out bone, osteoblast making bone. Most of us have dents in our skull from our glasses, if you wear glasses. Pull off the glasses, feel where the bow ends, and there'll be a little dip there in most people's skull. That's because of the constant pushing of those bows. That's how orthodontics works. That's how it's possible to change the position of teeth. Because by putting wires on them and pulling on the teeth, you're actually changing the bony sockets in which the teeth fit. Right. And makes them become straight. So this is an incredible process. Here is sort of our diving board that we were just looking at, only this time we're looking at real bone. We have stained the bone blue here, and we can see that inside we have osteocytes that have been buried. Okay? On the surface, notice all the osteoblasts down here. We said that if you push down on the bone here, it might cause osteoblasts to build more bone here to resist that push. So we see all these nice osteoblasts lined up along the bottom, making bone as fast as they can. And you see this great big cell right here. Yeah. That's an osteoclast. It's carving the top. Amazing. So the bone is changing. In fact, it's really intriguing. Even if we're not doing anything, we're just standing here, our bones are constantly having pieces of bone removed and then added right back again. You think, well, what good does it do to take bone away and then put it back again? It turns out that there are little microfractures, like a broken leg, only this is happening at the microscope level. There are little microfractures in our bones that are being constantly repaired by just simply turning it over. Take the bone away, put it back. Take the bone away, put it back. And it keeps repairing the little microfractures. So bone, I think, is just one of the most incredible structures in the body. Now, if you really want to have your socks blown off, let's take the femur. That's the bone in the leg here. Here is the neck of the femur, and this is the ball that fits into the hip socket. If we saw right down through the femur and look inside, we see the spongy bone we discussed before. Mm-hmm. And we notice this spongy bone is not just oriented any old way. It's lined up on very, very distinctive lines representing the forces that are coming to bear. So you have fibers that are running this way, or bone beams in this way. And it's oriented in such a way as to best withstand the force that's coming from our hip onto the head of that femur. If we look over here at our femur, and we magnify that center area, we can see these beams of bone that are lined up along particular lines here. Now, if a lady becomes pregnant, let's say, and all of a sudden has 20 pounds of weight out in here that she didn't have before, all these little beams in her leg bones and hips and everything will all reorient due to modeling to best accommodate that force. And when the baby's born, they all get modeled back to the way they were again.
It's so dynamic. It has built in it the ability to change and be what it needs to be.
Without the ability to change, of course, it wouldn't be very good for us. Now, we mentioned before that if bone were solid all the way across, it would be very heavy. We'd have no place to make marrow. It's just the surface of the bone that's compact, like a metal pipe.
Right.
And this compact bone has a really remarkable structure. It's quite different than the spongy bone. This drawing sort of tries to illustrate what it's like. First of all, remember our osteoclasts? I said they could drill like a drill bit? Right. They actually drill holes in the compact bone that allow the blood vessels to penetrate down in. And then when they drill the holes, bone forms around the blood vessels. For example, you see this little circle right here. That would be a drilled out hole running right down into the bone like this. And then a blood vessel would drop in there. And the bone would be produced layer by layer in concentric circles in a target pattern converging on that blood vessel. And that's what produces the compact bone. And in each layer, there are collagen fibers or connective tissue fibers like we have in our skin that are arranged like the plies in a radial ply tire. And each layer has a slightly different orientation. So it goes this way here and maybe goes this way down here and then this way here. And that makes the compact bone very strong. We call these Haversian systems, or ostions. Here's a place where at one time there was a big hole drilled right here by an osteoclast. A blood vessel, or two, little capillary, went in right there. And the bone formed around it layer by layer. First this layer, and then this layer, and it kept going until it got close to the vessel. Notice left behind are these bone cells, the osteocytes. And they communicate with little processes, one to another, in order to get nutrients from the canal where the blood vessels reside. Well, this is the way the whole thing looks in the scanning electron microscope. If we just make a cut through the bone, here is where the blood vessels went through. You can see the layer by layer that was formed coming in here. These little holes you see in here are little pits where the bone cells got left behind, the osteocytes. And you can see ring after ring. That's that radial ply tire effect I was telling you about that makes this bone, compact bone, stronger than cast iron for the same weight.
That's an amazing statement, that actually our bones, for the weight that they have, are stronger than cast iron.
Yes. And one of the reasons they're so strong is because bone is not just a homogeneous material. If bone were like a rock, you know what happens. You take a rock and you drop it on the ground, and depending on what kind of rock it is, it can shatter. It's hard, but it's brittle. Bone contains a hard, brittle material called hydroxyapatite. It's made out of calcium and phosphate ions, and it's a very hard crystal. But if that were the end of the story, if we fell down, we'd break our bones, they'd just shatter. But blended in with the mineral, here is a bone cell sitting in its little nest, and all around it we see bone in the scanning electron microscope. And the bone is not homogeneous material like fudge or something like that. It's fibrous. Notice all these little fibers in here. Those fibers are connective tissue fibers like we see in our skin, and they're blended in with the mineral. So the fiber plus the organic fiber plus the inorganic mineral gives bone its strength. We call this a composite tissue. It has two components like fiberglass. Fiberglass has a fiber component and a glass component. And the two together give properties you wouldn't get from either one alone.
And that's, so God built that strength in by the combination of the two ingredients.
That's right. You know, man uses the same principle when we make reinforced concrete.
Right.
Imagine if we made our bridge out of just pure concrete. The truck would go across, the concrete would crumble.
Yeah.
But inside the concrete we have this rebar, the iron rods that run through, we call it reinforced concrete. If we made the bridge just out of the iron bars, the rebar, what would happen when the truck goes across?
It would rot.
It would bend.
Yeah.
So the concrete alone, it would shatter. The iron rebar alone, it would bend. But when you combine the two together, you get properties better than either by itself.
Yeah.
And so here we can see in this reinforced concrete where it's been broken, we see the metal rods. Now, do you recall the story of the children of Israel when they made bricks just before they left Egypt?
I do indeed.
To go to the Promised Land? There was a statement I never understood as a child, and that is Pharaoh made the children of Israel go out and get their own straw as well as the clay to make the bricks. And I always wondered, what on earth does straw have to do with making bricks? I just thought you'd take clay, put them together, make a brick, that's it. But it turns out a brick made out of clay is brittle. If you made a brick just out of straw, you know from the three little pegs, that wouldn't hold up too well. But if you blend straw in with the clay, you get a very strong brick indeed.
It's really like the steel does it, rebars in the cement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I was in Peru, I saw people making brick in this way.
Wow.
They would take this clay that hardens just brick hard, and they would stomp with their feet straw into the clay. And when the two combine together, and then they cut it up in squares and allow it to harden, you get bricks that are much stronger, again, a composite tissue. And that's indeed the same thing that the children of Israel were doing when we read in Exodus chapter 5, verse 16. They complained, "There is no straw given to your servants," and they say to us, "Make brick." They had to go out and find their own straw.
Now, it's the same principle that we see applied there, God has already applied in our bones by the composite materials He uses to make them.
That's right, and it's this composite material that make our bones so strong that we can say they're stronger than cast iron for a given weight.
Incredible lesson. Dr. Menton, you've showed us some incredible things. We've got to take a break, but don't you go away. When we come back, there are some tremendous spiritual lessons we want to learn from the bones, and you'll want to be with us for that as well, so stay tuned.
Creation versus evolution. You weigh the evidence. The human eye, a chemical speedster. For us to see, chemical and electrical reactions must take place in the proper sequence. The fastest photographic film requires the camera lens to remain open for 1/10,000th of a second. Biologists tell us that the eye's photochemistry is so fast that the first reaction takes place in 1/5 billionth of a second. This is 500,000 times faster than our best film capabilities. Darwin himself admitted that the human eye seemed to defy his theory of evolution. Today's guest on Origins, anatomist Dr. David Menton, is a speaker for Answers in Genesis. Audiences enjoy his well-illustrated presentations on a variety of fascinating topics. Many of these lectures are available on DVD. If you're interested in the subject of creation, you'll definitely want these for your own. Orders are being taken at 800-778-3390. You can also write to Answers in Genesis, P.O. Box 510, Hebron, Kentucky 41048. Or visit the website at www.answersingenesis.org.
We're back from our break with Dr. David Menton. We've been talking about bones, and Dr. Menton has brought us a great lesson on how God has made our bones so that they can shape and adapt as we grow and change during our lives. But there's some spiritual lessons in our bones as well, isn't there, Dr. Menton?
That's right. You know, there are many organs of our body that are mentioned in the Bible, and certainly bones are one of them. The Lord clearly says in Job that He created our bones, and you know, it's interesting what His bones went through to heal our troubled bones. In Psalm 22, for example, we read an incredible, insightful view of what it must have been like for Jesus Christ on the cross. There we read, and I believe Jesus is saying, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. Certainly crucifixion would have pulled all the bones out of joint. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Think of it, this was written 1,000 years before this happened.
Yes, and
right?
500 years before crucifixion had even been invented.
That's right.
And here is the psalmist with a perfect picture of Jesus dying for our sins on the cross and what it did to our bones.
The wonderful prophecies of Scripture.
God's word's precious.
And you know, when you get to the New Testament, it just mentions again this important fact, just as the Old Testament said, that Jesus' bones would not be broken. They'd be pulled out of shape, but they wouldn't be broken. John chapter 19, verse 36, for these things were done, that the Scripture should be fulfilled. Not one of His bones shall be broken.
You know, it's a tremendous truth that the God who made our bones made the plan for our salvation. And one day, that body that has scars in the hands and a hole in the side, but no broken bones, is going to appear in the eastern sky. And His plan of salvation is going to be complete for those of us who have trusted Him. Isn't that right, Dr. Menton?
Absolutely, and I look forward to that day.
That's right. Trust Him today, and remember that He is your Creator, the one who planned your body, and the one who has a plan for your salvation. Put your hope and trust in God, the God of His Word. And remember, it's God's view that He created you, and that should be your worldview as well. And so we'll look for you next time here on Origins. God bless you till then.
thank you for watching this edition of Origins. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 809 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins Program, number 809, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania, 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.